Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you, Tammy?
I'm well. How are you, Helen?
Doing good.
Seems like it's a busy Monday already, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But that's okay.
Yeah, makes
Yeah.
the day go faster.
I love that background, Colleen.
Thank you. I wish there was some reality to it.
I know, right? Like that would be a great place to be right now.
Yeah, we're experiencing, I guess you all are aware, the power outage
Oh,
across the campus. So,
I'm working from home today, so I don't know what's happening in Durham today.
okay. Yeah, we're trying to make sure everybody was told to just go and do what you're doing, work remotely.
Hmm.
So trying to make sure students are safe and get fed.
Right.
So what happens with this? I would have the option to share screen. Is that what happens? I know Colin or Melissa's managing it.
I'm sorry, Colleen. I think I missed the last part of what you were saying.
So I'm presenting today. So does that mean I just would be able to share screen?
Yes, ma'am. You should be able to share screen. I'm trying to give a minute for Colin to get in, and then he'll run the meeting. I'm sorry, by the way. I sound horrible, and I'm fully aware.
Oh, wow. Yeah, feel better.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Right. I think we've got a quorum. Does that look right to you, Melissa?
Yep, I think that's right.
All right. I'm not sure Sharita will make it today, so we can go ahead and get started. I think we sent minutes out for multiple months in March. So if we want to adjust or approve any of those minutes, we can get started with that. Or we can kick it till next month if you want to wait. motion to approve the minutes from it's like multiple months, or we can resend them and do it in May.
Can we do it in May?
We can. We can do that. All right. I apologize. I was out last week on vacation trying to take a little bit of a rest. Let me put the agenda in here. We do have our unsheltered numbers. Right now, 49 families are unsheltered, 63 families. 27 families are at risk of homelessness and 42 singles at risk of homelessness. And that families has jumped substantially. And I think that's just because there's no room at the inn.
Hey, Colin, did you say 49 or 63 families?
49 families
Okay, thank you.
are reporting
Wow.
being unsheltered, 63 singles. So the singles have dropped. I think Urban Ministries is, you know,
Yes, there's been a lot of
Approaching.
vacancies at Urban Ministries in the last 2.5 weeks. So we've definitely been placing a lot of singles. It's the families. We just got one family room at Family Moving Forward today, and we got
Mhm.
one family room that opened at Urban Ministries. So we did get 2 families that will be going this week for intake.
It's a lot of families.
Yes.
Mhm. So, gotta try and figure out what's going on there. Obviously, if we don't have shelter space, we don't have shelter space, but we don't have shelter space if we can't exit folks, and without people accepting vouchers, it makes it harder to exit them. Or third-party payments, and landlords requiring 3 times the rent amount. So I dropped the agenda in the chat here, and unless there's any discussion that needs to be had on the unsheltered numbers, we can move on to Colleen and the gaps analysis.
If I learn how to unmute, that would be great.
You got it.
I just wanted to start out with the quote that we found, which was, every vulnerable population needs a voice. They need advocates and people to fight for them and their rights. We are all equal, just living under different circumstances. And I'll use that so that I can then, oops, I have to do this first. Make sure I share screen. Put in present mode. So can everyone see it? We're good.
We're good.
All right. And typically, gaps analysis is just for a 1-year period. But with the problems and pandemic and everything that we found in our process, it took longer than that period of time for us to go through it. We were asked in the spring in spring 2020 by the Policy and Planning Committee to create a subcommittee to look at 2 groups, 2 subpopulations based on the information that was shared with us by Hanalea at the time regarding homelessness in Durham, her annual numbers. And it appeared that there were 2 groups whose voice or who we didn't have clear information about. There were lots of questions, and that was the transition age youth, as well as persons experiencing mental health challenges or concerns. And so the group thought that it would be good for us to look more deeply, since we have to do the annual gaps analysis, to look at those 2 groups specifically. And then we were asked, in addition to looking at those 2 groups, to apply a racial equity lens in our data look. And so with the timeline, we started out and began to form a committee with members of our HSAC who could represent those 2 populations, and then to identify others within the community with various organizations who would be looking at those same two populations as well. We quickly found out from our group's level of experience that we had none, with the exception of staff from the city of Durham. And so we spent some time with there being training for us so that we could actually begin the process. Let me do one thing. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to, I don't know how to do this. Stop sharing for one moment. And one of the first things that we did was to create our, what we considered a vision. And I wanted to be able to share that with you as well, which was to prompt real change to create a fair and equitable system that effectively ends chronic homelessness in Durham while honoring the dignity of each person it serves by utilizing the resources and strengths of our communities, including the perspectives of those with lived experiences, recognizing our own limitations and biases, and holding ourselves accountable for ways in which our system excludes people and does harm. And so I wanted to make sure I shared that because we spent some cycles trying to just vision and determine what our work was going to be. Then that was followed by us actually going through the process of developing our research questions, as well as the rest of the work for our gaps analysis. And so these are the two research questions that we came up with and looking at one for the homeless, transition age youth, which is what gaps exist in Durham's homeless system that prevent the continuum of care from fully meeting the needs of transition age youth experiencing homelessness. And then our research question for those persons experiencing mental health challenges was how does a COC interact with persons experiencing the challenges who are also homeless. And the methodology that we used was a mixed methods, which is basically we decided that we were going to do qualitative analysis through client and staff interviews, and then quantitative analysis through our HMIS system. After completing the interviews, we went through a period of transcription and coding, as well as using some software to help us to come up with the findings that we did. So we broke it up into three different areas for our, well, 4 areas for our qualitative analysis. And our interviews, we looked at it from the client perspective, as well as frontline staff, middle management, and executive staff. So I wanted to share the findings that we had from our clients, which was these themes emerged, which was basically without an address, there is no service really available, with there being a cycle of housing insecurity. And that's concerning because with folks cycling in and out, sometimes the numbers appear that persons from the HMIS or quantitative perspective, that persons are homeless for shorter periods of time based on the HMIS system. But when you ask them, and you'll see through the data from Lloyd, that when people self-report, their period of homelessness tends to be a lot longer than what we have in our HMIS. Awareness regarding available resources, and then the impact of homelessness on their mental health space. So we're finding, and folk know that there's trauma associated with being homeless, and so it does negatively impact our persons who are experiencing mental health challenges. So if we started to look at the findings from the executive management, this the information stated here, but that the agencies that serve our transition age youth suggest that there should be a restructuring of the system so that youth can engage with the service in a better way. Some way to simplify it so that our TAY or our transition age youth have a better way to receive services. When you look at the numbers and our just pure numbers, the percentage of the populations that we serve who are transition age youth are a small number. But it appears sometimes that the students, I said students because I work with students, sorry about that, but our transition age youth become part of that population that we consider our chronically homeless. So that even though they're in a cycle and they're not necessarily a large number, it becomes part of that number potentially that could grow into our chronically homeless numbers. Then we have agencies that serve both the transition age youth and the mental health clients identify that access to medication can be a barrier, or it is a barrier, that when clients are discharged, they may not be able to necessarily continue with their prescriptions. So it becomes problematic for those persons who do have to have ongoing medication in order to maintain their existence. Then from the middle management, we had these findings, which was one was similar, just regular access to a prescribing doctor, as what was found for those in middle management, as well as those clients having clients would like to acquire additional housing. I'm sorry, the agencies would like to see there being additional housing. This is from the middle management perspective for those persons experiencing mental health challenges. Then from the frontline staff, the people who are working with the clients on a day-to-day, barriers that make it difficult include them having financial means, transportation, their mental health needs being met so that they can receive their medication. And that seems to come up quite often for persons who are experiencing mental health challenges. Then an area that they think would be an improvement would be to provide wraparound services for clients after they've been discharged. And again, for all of these findings, these are just some of the things or findings that came up to the top. We have a full list of findings in a final report that we're providing to you, and we'll make that available after this. And then from the HMIS, I did not get that one included, but when we look at the numbers again for persons who are in the transition age youth population, it appears sometimes that their numbers are small or smaller, but there seems to be a consistent or a constant number of transition age youth who are unsheltered. When we have our point in time counts, it's around 7 that remain in that space. So it looks like the percentages may go up or down because our overall total of persons who are homeless during the count fluctuate and have gone up. But it does not alter what we're seeing with our transition age youth. That was one of the keys that we wanted to bring up out of that. And then the recommendations that we were offering is to increase the awareness of resources, increase housing assistance for persons with criminal records. And the pictures are on top of my other side, I have to move you. Assess clients for mental health issues and set them up for transitional care, and also to be able to work with the stakeholders to increase availability of housing for everyone, not just the special populations. We had some other recommendations that we wanted to also bring to the group. One is to just share that this was a very, I guess, an enlightening experience for us, a wonderful experience for us. We learned quite a bit, but that this should be something that the HSAC and the continuum should use to make sure that we have funding so that we can have a gaps analysis done on an annual basis and not have it done by lay folk. We're willing to participate with the process and we're willing to be a part of it. There's a lot of passion around the work that's being done, but the biggest recommendation is that we wanted to make sure there was funding so that it could be done expeditiously. It appears that it's not something even that staff should be required to do. It's just a lot of work that goes into it. We have a lot of data that was collected, a lot of folk who were involved, and you can see who was on the committee. And the persons that are on this committee worked very hard and were very passionate about the work that we were doing because they care specifically about these populations because they are the populations that they serve. We had a cadre of students who assisted us as well. And even with the student support, it's still a huge undertaking. And but we still, again, want to acknowledge all of the persons who participated and supported the efforts that we had. And just a personal note from me, for the persons who are on the gaps analysis subcommittee, as well as the persons who were willing to be interviewed and share their lived experiences and their encounters and engagement with persons that they serve who are either transition age youth or persons experiencing mental health challenges. Your passion propelled you to advocate once more through this process of developing a gaps analysis in the hope of seeking voice for those persons who may not have had a voice, which is the reason we even started this process. So I don't know if there are questions for me, but that's our report. And again, there is a larger, I don't know if it's 20+ page report that goes with this, but that is available, will be available for the group.
I would like to say thank you, Colleen, to you and the entire committee. It was a massive, massive undertaking, and appreciate all of your hard work and all the time that I think you pulled in other NCCU staff and students to help out with this. So thank you, and thank you to the NCCU community for helping to get this this done. And it was a massive amount of work. So kudos to you and the team. Thank you.
And I'm looking around, I guess we lost all of them from the Policy and Planning Committee because it started out at least 4 or 5 other persons who were part of the initial work were on this committee. But yeah, it's just been some time.
There's a lot. We learned a lot of lessons that we don't want to do this deep of a dive ever again without paid staff.
Which brings me to my question. But first, I also want to say thanks, Colleen. And this is incredible that volunteers and lay people, as you say, would devote this kind of effort to this. And I'm hearing your recommendation loud and clear that there should be funding to support this work being done by someone other than volunteers. And so how might that request come forward? Colin, do you think, or what would be the best way? I mean, I feel like if commissioners and city council members were aware that there was this need for a funded study, you know, that we could make that happen.
I think there's 2 things to look at. I think there's one, as a system, we're kind of required to do an annual gaps analysis by HUD. And the way we've been doing our gaps analysis have been very, very focused on specific groups. And even before Colleen's group, the last few that we've had interns working on, we haven't been able to repeat any of those studies to figure out, have we closed any of these gaps? So we have to kind of ask ourselves, is our job looking at a systemic high-level gaps analysis? And then do we want to do some of these deep dives? But when you do these deep dives, you never know if you close that gap unless you repeat the exact same study 1, 2, 3 years later to find out if anything's changed. And when we've used interns, they've spent an entire academic year doing this work. And if we only focus on one little group, we end up building a homeless system that strives to meet the needs of one very specific group, and you lose track of, 80 or 90% of the rest of the group who doesn't fit that small targeted group. So I think there's room for both. It's just how do we want to do this on a go forward basis? And there's obviously good reason and logic to do the deep dive, for lack of a better term, an academic exercise into this, but we also need to take a step back and say, is this getting us to where we need to go? Are we being able to figure out how many unsheltered people do we have? How many units do we have? Who's getting housed on a very high level? Who's not getting housed at a high level? Because that's something that we could repeat on an annual basis to figure out, are we, disproportionately placing one group of people in permanent housing over another group based on, representation in the overall system or as representation in the community at large.
Colin, do you think it would be impossible? I think it'd be really difficult, but do you think it would be impossible to do a longitudinal study?
Well, I don't think it would be impossible to do a longitudinal study because we do, and that's part of our analysis, is we do a longitudinal system analysis every year that gets uploaded into HUD. And that's a major data cleanup that NCCEH works with all of the homeless service providers to clean up the data. So we get the best unduplicated data possible. And it's submitted to HUD on an annual basis where we can look at how many people came into the system, how many people exited the system, how many people returned to the system. And there's some other really good data visualization tools that HUD has put out there in their different programs where we could use what we're already doing to try and figure out how has this looked. And Lloyd, I think, recently presented on some of that longitude, some of the system performance measures. And those system performance measures are kind of a longitudinal piece as well of saying, what do these look like? I mean, we can go back, good grief, in that system, it goes back at least 6, maybe 10 years worth of data when HUD started doing it. Of course, we've had some changes in the system because at one point, our point in time count was substantially higher because everybody at rescue mission was counted as homeless. But then we made a decision in maybe 2016 or 17, Lloyd's not here. Sally, you were here at that time. You might remember what year it was that we decided to, as a system, to not count those because we weren't able to independently verify that everybody was legitimately homeless.
Yeah, I don't remember specifically. It was a while ago.
So basically quantitatively, it's a possibility. Qualitatively, it's more difficult.
Well, yeah, to do a qualitative longitudinal study would be substantially more difficult.
Yeah.
However, I think looking at the quantitative data, and it's kind of like today, we looked today just at a gap. We saw, X number of families are experiencing unsheltered homeless, X number of singles are experiencing that. Well, that's quantitative data, but the qualitative piece is, well, there's no openings in the shelters and we've got landlords. That's the qualitative piece that sort of backs up that change. So I think there's ways of doing it. If we saw that, it probably wouldn't be too difficult to talk to, I'm sure Volunteers of America could probably have some conversations with families and say, hey, how's this affecting you? What are you doing when this is there? To fill in some more data points to be shared that when there is none of this, this is where people are staying. This is how people are surviving in the absence of shelter.
Yeah.
So does that answer? Sorry, Heidi, I'm not sure that answered your question, but if we're looking at funding, I think those are how to fund these could come out of, city and or county funds if we wanted to do a deep dive, and or when we take interns into the system, we could do that. I think Russ has some interns coming in and doing some work over at Housing for New Hope, maybe specifically on landlords, but it's still a piece. Go ahead, Russ.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mean, we're having some pretty good luck getting, not that interns can do everything, but if you get the right interns from the right place where they're consistent in terms of their performance, it helps a lot. And so we're having good luck getting some pretty set, almost like job patterns and work patterns we need from them and plugging people in. And so it just keeps running. And so I do think, particularly with Sanford, because they tend to do a lot of that research, and there's a huge interest in housing from them. Like they can't find enough internships. The people that are interested in like in the homelessness piece, but particularly the housing side, affordable housing side of it. There's some opportunities there if it's well structured and honestly quite easy to supervise once it's up and running.
Angela Holmes.
Good morning. I don't remember the year exactly, but I do remember that I had to sign off on not accepting the Durham Rescue Mission's data.
When you were HSAC chair.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Go ahead, Colleen.
I just know that it was problematic for us, and when we approached, when Hanalea said she approached the city regarding hiring someone to assist us in this process, even if we hired a grad assistant or something like that, that there was not monies, or there was not a way to get someone hired. And that's what we were trying to do, because we had found a wonderful graduate student from NC State who actually works in the homeless space, or had done that for a number of years and was going back and getting her degree. We just couldn't pay her. And had we been able to do this, we probably would have been done, well over a year earlier than we were able to get it finished. But it was just a matter of enough funds to hire a graduate assistant versus us getting those students who are doing it as part of the coursework. So that was what we found.
Yeah, and some of that is tied to funding for the position, and the other piece with interns, at least on the city side, we have to go through the same process as hiring a new employee and posting it and going through resumes. It's a hiring process, and at the time we had vacancies we were trying to fill, and as a department, and it was, where do you spend the energies finding an intern versus finding full-time staff? And at the time, there was some of that needed to be focused on filling staff vacancies. So yes, once we get fully staffed, it'll be much easier to take on interns. And I know that the director of our department, Reginald, is a proponent of interns and hiring interns whenever possible. That's a good suggestion, Russ, is taking it off the city to bring in interns and let some of our nonprofit partners bring in interns as well. So I'm in favor of that as well. Okay. Other questions, comments? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Colleen, for you and your team's incredibly hard work on this. Thank you. We invited Russ Pierce to join us today as Housing for New Hope is exploring the possibility of purchasing an apartment complex and potentially needing some support from the Homeless Services Advisory Committee, and suggested that he come and talk to the Policy and Planning Committee today about this, so that Policy and Planning could ask questions and make a recommendation one way or another to HSAC later this month. So with that, Russ, I will turn it over to you. You may be muted still.
And here I was feeling so proud that I could like share a PowerPoint, but I can't turn mute off. We'll keep trying.
Very good.
I appreciate the kind of last minute invitation to share a little bit with the group, and some folks know about parts of this and some folks don't. So I'm probably going to be a little bit basic, if that's okay, just to kind of get folks caught up on what's happening. And what I'm sharing is not confidential, but we remain discreet because it involves a property that currently has people living in it. A number of folks are involved in the discussion, so feel free to jump in the chat, interrupt me, anything if there's pieces I miss, so we can kind of give as broad a picture as we can. So just to get a kind of base level definition, because I know in the work we do, we often hear permanent housing or supportive housing or permanent supportive housing, and we go immediately to HUD's definition of permanent supportive housing, which is one type of supportive housing. So a lot of what we're discussing today is supportive housing with a bit broader of a definition, meaning deeply affordable housing, generally speaking, 30% AMI or less, oftentimes much less, with integrated supportive services. When you're looking at PSH from the HUD side, you are often seeing you have to have a requirement for chronic homelessness, which means at least a year, and a disabling condition. Truth be told, vast majority of supportive housing, whatever definition it's running over, tends to include folks who meet those definitions in one way or another. And we'll run into some of that and explain a little bit more of it as we go forward. Just a little background to folks who don't maybe know H&H real well. So our agency actually started out of the fact that our founder actually ran the shelter. And what he saw was people going out to housing and very quickly coming back and said, okay, this is not working. We need to find something else here. And so originally we started as transitional shelter back in 1992. So from the beginning, matching housing with intensive supports. We did this for both men and women in 2 separate houses. Over time, we have built additional residential communities where folks have their own lease and then are able to access supportive services. Andover Apartments, which is near downtown, has 20 units. Williams Square, which is out near the crossing of Roxborough and Carver. I always tell people it's up by the kind of in the woods behind the Panera up there and the Chick-fil-A and things. It's 24 units. And what's interesting is we built these because Andover was built in 2 phases, one building and then another, and then Williams Square. You can see in places where we learned more and more as we went. So we started out with an office that probably 2 or 3 of us could not comfortably stay in without practically touching, then moved to a community space that had room for 8 or 10 people. And then the next one at Williams Square was built with a community space that could hold like 30 or 40 and have offices on site for supportive services. We also, I say kind of jokingly, some mistakes we made on the first one, we kept repeating, and only now we're able to reflect and see things we won't do. Like for some reason, we gave everybody dorm-sized refrigerators, which is just not workable. Probably even in dorms, they don't have those much anymore. So there's been an ongoing conversation, multiple conversations to be quite honest. And part of this comes out of a Familiar Faces initiative that Wendy Jacobs and Gudrun Parma have been very involved with. And I think part of what has happened is they've been part of this ongoing conversation, but they also had a chance to visit another site down in San Antonio. And it really sparked their energy and interest in, is there something else that we could be doing that would better serve the populations that need to access this kind of housing? And so part of this Familiar Faces initiative, this was kind of an interesting piece. Many of you know the Corporation for Supportive Housing. If you don't, they're a great website to go and visit. They really have best practices information and are deeply engaged in this kind of work all the time. But one of the pieces they have been working through is helping communities understand the overlap. So let's say somebody is trying to access HUD, COC, PSH, right? They're going to have to show a year of chronicity, either a straight year or, I always get this a little bit wrong, a cumulative year in 4 episodes across 3 years. Did I get that right, Colin? I always get my 3 and 4 mixed up there. But anyway, it's pretty technical. And that's just really focusing on the homeless service system. What they've been making the case for is when you actually look at usage of the health system, including emergency services, and you look at the jail system, you find more people who have chronicity across these 3 different systems in a very interesting way and are very much needing the same kind of support, even if they aren't able to even if they aren't able to hit that homeless service system year. Part of the conversation came from the fact that there's 10 million in county ARP funds that there's been much discussion about for housing. That goes back 2 to 3 months now. And so there's been more, that conversation, Familiar Faces initiative, in ways started to overlap around the conversation for, we need to look at, can we get 100 units of supportive housing in one place with deeply integrated services, preferably up near Duke Regional Hospital, because there's so many services up in that particular area. So what's interesting about this number of 100 is that even in our experience at Housing for New Hope, 20 units, 24 units, even if you design the building to have supportive services on site, it's very hard to get a regular presence from other agencies to be on site with just 24 units. But what we're seeing in other places, like Moore Place in Charlotte, has 120 units of supportive housing with wraparound services on site. They are actually in the process of converting they're converting a hotel to a similar situation, Rise on Clanton. And because of that critical mass, they're able to get the services on site on a very, very regular basis. And we're talking about mental health, substance use, physical health, in some cases support around pharmacy related needs, job services, financial services, like really kind of the whole kit caboodle, some cases every day, in some cases on more of a rotation. Another one that gets lifted up often is Sanderson Place in Denver. There's a 60 units, but they have kind of a cluster of different projects within pretty reasonable distance of each other. This one's particularly fascinating to a number of us because it has a trauma-informed design so that there are no shadows. There are really very few corners where they can be avoided. It's really designed to create a very holistic place for the folks that we're trying to serve. The other one that's still in dream and building phase is Kings Ridge in Raleigh, which again is going to be about 100 units of supportive housing. There's going to be a lot of things integrated, and Wake County, Wake Med Alliance, CASA is the lead on this. They're all working towards this project. Some of the questions are, why does Durham not have this? Well, interestingly, in the midst of having this conversation, this is where we lapse from into discreet, please, information, not confidential, but we're still trying to be a bit discreet. Right about the time this conversation was really picking up, Housing for New Hope was notified that a 48-unit senior housing complex that is immediately adjacent to our William Square property is being put up for sale. There are a number of us that work in partnership with Self-Help. There's a broker that keeps an eye out for these properties for us. So we were informed, CASA was informed, DHIC was informed, and the response was, well, heck, if you look at it, and I think you can probably see on my screen here, the big red dot is Carver Creek. The immediately adjacent building is William Square. And so the interesting thing about this property is that this is 11.5 acres together. The majority of it has a creek and woods in it that you really can't mess with. There's projected to be a greenway put through the property by the city or county. There is actually this is served by its own bus stop. It is very close to grocery stores, restaurants. You can get easily to Duke Regional Behavioral Health Center. Both of those are within 1.3 miles, and there's walkable, workable sidewalks, if you know what I mean. Some places there's sidewalks that you wouldn't want to try, but it's very doable, and we've seen people with their motorized pieces making that journey when that is what they need to do. Interestingly, it's not just the fact that this property itself and these buildings are available, it's that on the top arrow, some of that land and those trees is owned by Carver Creek. Some of it is owned by William Square, by Housing for New Hope. You put them together, you can quite easily put 45 to 50 more units on site. In a very future sort of way, there's also the possibility for another building. I don't know if you can see my arrow moving or not. These two buildings here at William Square are residential buildings, and that's a community center. There is enough space here outside the floodplain that another building with at least that footprint could go on the site here. So it creates a possibility of 24 units, add 48, you're at 72, add 45 to 50, you're in the 100 to 120 range in terms of the number of units that would be available on the property. The property that's under discussion for purchase was built in 93. Has 48 units. They're 1-bedroom units. They seem to be in pretty good shape. We're in the midst of finishing inspections of all of those. There's some good community space in there, much of which would require updating and reconfiguration so that we could get supportive services on site and integrated. One of the important pieces to know about this property, you know, when you build affordable housing units, they are generally protected for 30 years. This building's protections all end on December 31st of 2023. Sometimes agencies have snuck in a 3-year transition period. This building does not carry it. So the only holdover at this point would be if this went market rate and was sold kind of on the open market, any lease that was signed up through the end of this December would need to be you know, honored through the year, but then that would be it. So and it is currently set as seniors 55 plus who are 50% AMI or less. So what we're in discussion about is, again, broadly supportive housing. So yes, some HUD-defined PSH. Alliance is interested in participating and could support renovation of up to 20% of the units, or partner with us on the creation of a new building along the same lines. So folks who have the same kinds of needs but aren't necessarily able to hit the chronicity. We see opportunity for transition in place clients, and by that we mean somebody could come in with a rapid rehousing grant, could potentially shift to a scattered site PSH grant, and then shift to a housing choice voucher and never have to move, thus reducing a lot of the trauma that folks experience. There's interest in and potential to partner with the Criminal Justice Resource Center. They do have some funding sources to support folks that are just returning, and also legacy tenants who would benefit from supportive housing. So, and let me make a comment on that because it comes up later and people have been very concerned. What happens to everyone who's there? Now, the very interesting piece is that in order to receive funding through the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, for example, you have to have a marketing plan. And one of the first things we found out was that the marketing plan basically says 2 things: call the Durham Housing Authority, and number 2, call Urban Ministries. So the vast majority of folks who are in these units have come through our system or come very closely in parallel systems. And so our sense is there are a number of folks who would really benefit from supportive housing. So there is not a need to rush to move people out. Additionally, in light of the condition of the building, there is not a rush to move people out necessarily for major renovations. It looks like we could prioritize the creation of new units instead of creating any displacement. So those are both really good pieces. In terms of the sources of funding and the acquisition, we are working quickly and diligently with the city and county to get hold of this property, and also working with some private donors. In terms of renovation, there are funds you can see from a number of places there, and sorry, there's acronyms. So North Carolina Housing Finance Agency has supportive housing specific funds. And literally when we called them to discuss the sale and understand what was on the property, they started offering to connect and interested in this and the potential new building. Alliance, as I said, is interested. That Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta remains interested in this. In fact, Williams Square, 12 years later, is still shown on their site and in their presentations of a project they're particularly proud of on Durham Affordable Housing Bond Funds and then private donation. In terms of new construction, at the time that the $4.2 million in home ARP funds are put out with an RFP, this would line up quite well, the new construction. Again, NCHFA has supportive housing funds. There's been some recommendation that this could actually be put forward for one of the 9% LIHTC projects. That's not something that regularly happens in North Carolina, supportive housing being tied to LIHTC, but it seemed like a number of pieces would line up pretty well for that to be a possibility. To share a little bit about who's in the conversation, Community Safety Department, particularly the HEART team, has been involved. Ryan, all the way up to Ryan Smith. Durham Homeless Cares Transitions, Julia Gamble's been very engaged with us. Multiple parts of Duke University and the health system. I have to say, a number of folks who've been around a long time and have a better sense of the history of this have been amazed at the level of engagement from various parts of Duke and willingness to make more connections. And there's a great group that's working on some research I'll mention in a minute, being able to name off the cost of the folks who are familiar faces into the emergency services, emergency room, and what that's costing and how this might help address that. And you see some other partners who are there. So where we are now is H&H has the property under contract for $6,050,000, which puts the units about 125 to 129. Even if you had to spend money on renovating, you don't get anywhere close to what it's costing to build new units at this point, which is upwards of $300,000. And as I kind of joke, I feel like we're going to be able to buy a building for $6 million, and then we're going to buy a piece of property for $50,000 that when put with property we already have creates an extraordinary opportunity to add much more to it. We are working in a tight timeline because the due diligence period, if you've ever bought a house, same thing works on these. The money you've got down locks in on a certain date, and that date is May 27th. So again, we're in active conversation with the city manager and the county manager on how support for the project might work. Community partners have formed, I'm almost done, I promise. Partners formed 3 teams. Like I said, there's a data team that's looking not just at, what are we seeing now, but how do we start tracking things? Because our sense is that this could be the first of these kind of transformational campuses, and we can make the case going forward for additional campuses to integrate deeply affordable housing and services right on site. There's a group working on design of supportive services, planning and budgeting. And then we are also, and I'm probably say this until I'm blue in the face, we are determining where partners on the property, and I got a typo in there, my apologies. We're determining partners and properties, sorry, it is correct, where current residents who choose not to stay at Carver Creek could easily transfer. So for example, EHIC is exploring how they could amend their recruitment marketing plan to make it so there would be an easier way if somebody said, you know what, as this becomes more focused on supportive housing, this is not the environment I want to be in, to streamline that process so that if that was the choice they wanted to make, it wouldn't be like going into the open market, so to speak, and trying to find housing. So then, of course, just known challenges, securing funding, ensuring adequate cash flow. But one of the things that's very typical of much affordable housing is to build and get subsidy for about 50% of it. And I will say from our experience over the years and that you need to be in the 80 to 100% subsidy for supportive housing, because one of the wear and tear on the buildings is different, 2, people's ability to pay is different, and because you're working with much more vulnerable populations, and 3, you sometimes have to self-fund the supportive services. That's largely been our experience with Williams Square and Andover. And so you need to fund as much as possible at the head end to make that flow much better. We're working through determining renovation costs. So far, there's nothing that made anyone gasp. So that's very encouraging. Of course, managing expectations and how we'll work with the current tenants. And then at some point, rezoning needs for additional buildings, but that actually looks like it could be quite straightforward. There really aren't any other neighbors to this property hardly, other than an apartment complex that's back and up on a hill, and it's already there, so it wouldn't really be any change for them. So the request coming out of the group that's working on this, because the city and county are looking at having conversations about this in May relative to the due diligence and the attempt to close on this by the end of June, so that it doesn't go market rate. The request is for the Planning and Policy Committee, and thus HSAC, to send a letter of endorsement or support for city and county investing in this toward the creation of a supportive housing campus. That is a lot of information all at once. And Colin was right. It was about 20 minutes. I didn't think it would be. Let me stop there for questions, comments. I'll turn that screen back off. And I should say others have been in these conversations. So there's pieces I missed or corrections, absolutely jump on in.
I think that was a fantastic presentation. Very well summarized, covered, very thorough. And I have been in some of these conversations, and it was great to hear it all in one piece wrapped up. It was really outstanding, Russell. And I just strongly encourage our group and HSAC to send forward a letter of support for this, a letter of endorsement for this. I think that would give it even more credibility than it already has. We know we have the need. Colleen highlighted some of the needs today that this would help address. So really hope we'll take that stab and formally endorse this. So
is that a motion that you're making, Commissioner Carter, to?
I want to be sure everybody knew that I really believe this, and let somebody else make the motion probably, but yeah.
Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion to recommend that the HSAC, and what we'll do is the committee will make a recommendation to the HSAC, and HSAC will make the final vote, and we'd have the chair send a formal letter of support.
I'd like to make a motion to provide a letter of support from the Policy and Planning Committee, or for the Policy and Planning Committee to make the recommendation to HSAC to provide the letter of support.
I second that. I'm Angel.
All right, so all those in favor, please vote yay in the chat. All right, looks like motion carries. Anybody who wants to vote nay is welcome to do so. And any abstentions as well. All right, motion carries. We will bring this up at HSAC. We'll probably, Russ, you may need to do this presentation one more time for the full HSAC, since the full HSAC's not here, but we can figure that out at executive committee next week, or not next week, this week, Friday.
We appreciate it. And I will say this is a very fast moving train. As several people have said, this was not in our work plan for this year, but a tremendous opportunity. So if there are things that as you think about this over the next 24, 48 hours, you're like, have they considered X or Y or Z? Do not hesitate to shoot me an email at russ@housingfornewhope.org. I'd rather be told 3 times than for us to miss something, because we're trying to move so quickly. So we have been really, I think, really humbled and encouraged at the same time by the number of folks coming together to say, hey, we've got to figure this out. This is a tremendous opportunity. So absolutely, just shoot me an email with anything you think of.
Fantastic. Thank you, Russ. Thank you, group. With that, let's move on to our next item agenda with some possibilities of change coming, request of looking at changes to our coordinated entry system, and Nicole Lamb is going to give us an update. This came to me the other day and suggested that before we do any changes or look at things, we've got some time, but wanted to talk it through with policy and planning and make sure we're not missing something. So Nicole, I will turn it over to you to share where VOA is and what your needs and what you're thinking.
Yes, thank you. Hi, good morning still. It's 11:30, so good morning to everyone. So we wanted to just put out, so when COVID started, before COVID, we had person intakes when people were considered at risk of being homeless or homeless. They would come to, we had 2 locations, which we have the DSS building. We have an office there from 8 to 4. And then we have an office at the Gilbert Street location. Volunteers of America has the office here to accommodate until 8 p.m. because DSS closes at 4. So then clients could come here until 8 p.m. to do person intakes. Well, now that we have a 24-hour Zoom line where the clients can call in, and we have all of our case managers has a personal Zoom line, and then we have a main streamline phone so they can leave voicemails 24 hours. We have staff from 8:30 in the morning until 8 o'clock at night to answer the phones and to do intakes by the phone. And then we send the referrals over to shelter, or if we help them with move-in assistance, which we do with security deposits. And we also help with travel diversion. So if a client is unsheltered, but they have a family or friend outside of North Carolina, we provide the travel diversion funding for them to go there so they're not unsheltered in Durham. What we are, I guess, proposing is we are not getting the same traffic that we were at Gilbert location anymore. And we wanted our leases up in August. So we were talking about closing this office down and just using DSS, because then we can use that money that we pay each month for rent to for more funding for client assistance, for move-in and for travel diversion. So we're just thinking, I just wanted to put it out there if it makes sense to people, because, just right now, we are paying rent each month and we're not really seeing the traffic that we were. And because all the clients call us in our Zoom line, in our cell phone, in our direct Zoom lines. So that's what we're just trying to think, instead of putting money towards rent, we could put that money towards more client assistance.
Nicole, refresh my memory. The Gilbert Street location was only open in the after hours and on weekends,
Yes.
correct? So it's,
Yes.
it's not even open 8 hours a day. It's only open 8 hours a day on Saturday, Sunday, and holidays.
Yes.
So we're paying so VOA is paying some money to have an empty building over 90% of the time. And pre-pandemic, what was the typical flow of people in those after hours and weekends? Was there a steady stream of people coming to that location after hours and weekends?
It was not. It was a lot of people being released from jail that would come directly to us at night, or there was people from the hospital coming here, but it was sporadic. It wasn't a consistent basis for in-person intake after hours.
And then since the pandemic, when we've had to switch everything to virtual, even after hours intakes.
Oh, the call
Gilbert-
volume has gone. Yeah, we do about, I can tell you, last month we did over 350 new intakes of households. And
Was
that's
that
at after hours, there was 150.
Okay, so about a third of the calls are
Mhm.
after hours and weekends.
Mhm.
And it's virtual, but it hasn't picked back up at Gilbert afterwards.
No.
Okay. And I saw Ebony had a question, or I think it was your hand that was up.
Yes, Colin, you answered my question. I just wanted to make sure, I wanted to know the hours of when it's operating, but it doesn't sound like it's needed. So it's very exciting to know that we can put those funds somewhere else.
Yeah, because I think it is definitely more needed with the funding with, especially like security deposit or travel diversion to get, more people from not being unsheltered.
Just for the record, I never sent parents. I don't know if I knew about that location. So I never shared that location with any of my parents. So.
Other thoughts, concerns? Things that we might be missing? Because it's roughly about $1,000 a month lease for an office that sits
Yes.
vacant most of the time.
And we would still have the staff working till 8 p.m. So, and they can just call from the Zoom line and, so we will definitely have all the staff still the same hours saying, so our clients would not be affected of not being able to, call us.
All right, I'm not hearing a whole lot of conversation. I see people thinking, or it looks like people are thinking.
I'm just wondering about people that may not have a phone.
Yeah,
walk-
they do go to DSS building. They do have a lobby and they have kiosks at the lobby at DSS from 8 to 4 where they can call us on the Zoom line there.
And so how do they know? They talk to someone at DSS that guides them in how to call you?
Yes, and then it's also on the website, and most of like our partners, like Housing for New Hope, I know they have it on their voicemail of our Zoom line, and so does all the shelters.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, people that are unsheltered that may not have access to the websites or phones or computers, just that. But it sounds like that there's not that many. Is that what I'm hearing? There's not that many?
If the ones that don't have a phone, they usually get a phone from their friend if they're standing next to a friend, or they go to DSS, and the information desk there at DSS does tell them the Zoom line, and then they go use the kiosk right there at the lobby. And then we also have an office right there too. So and we always have people staffed there from 8 to 4 Monday through Friday there also.
Okay, all right, that helps. Thanks, Nicole.
No problem.
Go ahead, Russ.
Sorry, I really was about to leave. But in the original design, part of the idea was to have additional nodes, like the street outreach team can do quite a bit of entry and connect them over to entry point. There was even discussion going back, interestingly, to some of what you said earlier, Colleen, about young adults, that you could have a node within kind of the organizations primarily working with young adults and youth to get them directly connected in. So part of how this has been formally and informally done, at least on the street outreach side, is folks that don't have any connection can get their info in via one of the street outreach workers. But just to say, in the background, there was this original idea of having a couple of additional nodes as an extension, in a sense, of the work of DOA.
And so I guess I still had the same question that Tammy had, and it's what happens, and Nicole, you answered that really clearly, how you support between the hours of 8 and 4, but after 4 and on the weekends and holidays, I didn't hear what support happens for a person who does not have access to a phone, because that's some of what we found, that not everybody has cell phones and access. So I'm talking about the period 4 to 8 in the evening, and then weekends and holidays. What are you saying happens?
I can say we don't see the traffic. I mean, I wish I could say we see the traffic, but I can tell you in the last 6 months to even over a year, we have not had anyone come to the office unless they had an appointment to get a gas card for travel diversion or a bus ticket or a train ticket. So we have not had anyone really not be able to contact us on the Zoom line. The other option we were talking about is if we did close the office, we could also use some of that funding to be able to get cell phones. So then if people don't have cell phones, maybe we can do a 30-day, phone card, and they can pick it up at the DSS office and be able to use that phone for at least 30 days to contact us per shelter.
My understanding, even from the beginning, when we had staffing there all the time, there were less than a handful of after-hour in-person intakes at Gilbert Street a month. It was very, very, very infrequently used pre-pandemic, from what I recall. And it was hard to find any concrete numbers other than there's a lot of times we have staff sitting over there and do nothing because nobody shows up. I mean, not that they were doing nothing, but they didn't have any in-person.
They didn't have in-person intakes. They were just doing follow-up calls. Yeah.
And that was the whole reason for standing up the Gilbert Street location, was so that people had a place to go that didn't feel comfortable going to Health and Human Services. And since Gilbert Street got stood up, and Russ alluded to it, is we've got a street outreach hub that people who are unsheltered, when the street outreach team goes out to them, they can do the same intake that Nicole's team does and put them in the right projects so that they're, either the street outreach worker does it or is there with a phone and can connect them to VOA.
And we do have a lot of clients that don't have phones. They'll go to the VA, like if they're a veteran, or the heart team is another. Our Alliance case managers, they'll call with the client on the phone for us to be able to do an intake and get their information.
Yeah. I think you're right, Colleen, is how do we ensure that people without phones and without access have that access? And it seems like what we've had put in place over the last few years with the advent of the heart team, the street outreach team, even Sally's team at Project Access is a hub for medically vulnerable. We've got more people reaching out to folks who may or may not have access and trying to connect them to the centralized system. So I think it is important for us to keep track of. And I also know that Gilbert Street has had several break-ins, vandalisms.
Yes.
Over the
Twice
years,
in the last 6 months.
with things being stolen and broken, which has also added expense to VOA to pay for repairs. So it's kind of it's not just the rent, it's also the replacing computers that get stolen, replacing broken windows and other things that have been vandalized. Other thoughts, questions? Would it make sense to try, but back up a second. Can people do in person at Gilbert Street now, Nicole?
Yes, they do. I mean, if someone comes, yes, we have a sign, they ring the doorbell. We do have someone come in. For safety, I always have 2 employees in here because there's one window and the door, usually the clients sit right near the door. So for safety issues, I always make sure that we try to have 2 employees in here if we do an in-person intake. So, there is still access. I mean, there's still availability for them to do an intake. But like I said, we have staff here on the weekends and holidays, and I can tell you in the last 6 months, maybe 1 or 2 come in. Most of the time they go to the shelter and then the shelter will tell them what, the process.
Would it be possible, without adding a whole lot of work to the team, to do a tracker for the next 30 or 60 days, just to see how many in person we have actually coming in? So we've got some concrete numbers that we can look at, just to, do our due
Definitely
diligence.
do that. Yes.
And then we can report back to the committee and just sort of say, hey, this is what we're seeing with concrete numbers.
I think that would be helpful. I tell you, the reason I'm kind of thinking through this is we are getting a lot more calls coming directly to families moving forward, and a lot more people just showing up, and they're very confused on where to go and what the process is. And of course, we tell them, the process, and we give them the phone numbers and that sort of thing. So I've been asking this question for about a month and a half. Why now are we seeing, we know the numbers of families has gone up, so maybe that's an indicator, but I'm just wondering why, we're getting so many that are just showing up at our shelter or, calling in, and they're not even calling our direct line. They're calling different, caseworkers and saying, I heard that, you know, to call the shelter, and we're telling them, you've got to call entry point, and giving them the number and walking them through the process. So I'm just kind of trying to make sense of it.
I'm wondering, this is just a hypothesis. If we have people showing up at Families Moving Forward, I'm wondering, because we have a 211 system where if you're if you're in crisis, you would call 211. If I call 211 and say I'm a family experiencing homelessness, they're going to give me a list of homeless shelters that serve families in Durham and tell me to get in touch with them. I'm wondering if these are referrals that are coming through the 211 system, because 211 doesn't necessarily know or necessarily refer people to the coordinated entry system, because their whole job is providing, here are the people who do the services.
That might be, that's it. That makes sense.
I don't have a way to prove it or disprove it. It's just a hypothesis at this point,
Yeah.
knowing that there is that system in place and that it is set up more like an information referral line.
Yeah.
Just wondering why we wouldn't share as information for them our coordinated entry
I have,
process.
I
For
have.
211.
Yes, I have emailed them, I have called, I have explained to them, do not have clients go to the shelter directly. Explain, you know, how it works. I even know someone that works at 211, so I had even her try to coordinate, you know, explain the process and that. And I just know that a lot of the people that answer 211, it's virtual, and they'll just go down, they have a list, and they literally go down the list and of shelters, you know, in different counties. I even provided them a statewide coordinated entry numbers to call for each county, you know, because each county has a coordinated entry system. So I even provided that to them to try to help. And I probably need to call again because it's been like 2 weeks. So and I know people have called, and I'm glad, Tammy, you told me that, because I know UMD has stated the same thing, that they're having the same issue. But yeah, what I can do is, like, for the next, you know, 30 to 60 days, I can just make sure the staff, if anyone does come in person and it's not a scheduled appointment, you know, to come do a person intake, I can definitely get that data for you guys.
That'd be great. Thank you, Nicole.
You're welcome.
All right, so we will do a little time study, see what our in-person numbers are, and Nicole will do a little outreach to 211 and try to re-educate and redirect folks, so we don't have people just showing up at UMD and Families Moving Forward. Some of it may also, I'm wondering, Tammy, if your folks, if they do show up, could say, hey, how did you find out about us? Or who told you to come here, and find out, is it 211? Is it rescue mission? Is it?
Yeah, we're happy to ask that question.
And try and find out for, you know, the next 30 days, people would just show up. Where are they getting the information? That'll help us
Yeah.
try.
I have a theory. There's a website called the Durham Network of Care. And if you click on housing resources, it takes you to the Bull City online resource guide. And the Durham Network of Care, if you look at homeless shelters, the first shelter that pulls up is Families Moving Forward, then the Durham Rescue Mission, then Durham Social Services Coordinated Intake, then Urban Ministries of Durham, and then the Rescue Mission Women's Shelter. So just taking that list of the first one they find, because I know before we had entry points set up fully, people were calling the city requesting services, because that was the number that was listed for homeless services instead of the coordinated entry number. So the Durham Network of Care is sort of a catch-all guide for a lot of services in Durham. So if anyone, you know, if we reach out to someone who keeps that list or updates it, I don't know if we can triage that to make sure that the entry point number is the first one. I'll put the link in the chat as well.
Hey, Nicole, just out of curiosity, when is your lease up? Just making sure we're,
Oh, August 1st,
okay.
2023.
This looks like it's a county site, so I'll see if I can figure out. Or maybe Commissioner Carter knows who manages,
You see Helen put something in the chat.
or Helen.
No, I'm saying she just put something in the chat.
Alliance Health has been the one that's maintained the Durham Network of Care site for many years. Deborah Duncan was the person responsible for it. I don't know if she still is or not, but I can find out and let y'all know so you can get the correct information to her.
That'd be perfect. So we could just swap out the phone numbers, take the addresses off and just put in the coordinated entry phone number and
Right.
call it a day. That'd be the easiest way of handling it. Okay. All right. I think we've got a plan. Any other thoughts, concerns?
And I might be slow on this one, but the intent in telling us that is so that a decision could be made to no longer rent or to have a physical location at Gilbert Street. That's what you're trying to decide now?
Correct. It's sort of one of the things that VOAs recognize that we've got needs, there's more needs on the financial side, and here's a way of reallocating resources from an underused location to here's a way we could assist people using this money. Instead of paying rent, we could use it on diversion, direct assistance for clients. And before we did it, it was a call Dr. Collins made to me, and thinking through, I was like, I don't have any objection from a city contract standpoint of allowing that shift to happen. However, the offsite location was set up for a reason. Let's talk it through policy and planning. And since we've got time with the lease expiring at the end of August, you would have to probably let them know at the beginning of July that you're not going to renew. But it gives us some time to think it through and make sure that we don't have any unintended consequences or miss something. And that's one of the big things I always worry about with policy is, oh, this makes a lot of sense. And it's a short-sighted, and it's like, oh, didn't realize that was going to create a ripple down here. So just wanted to think it through with the committee. And it sounds like we've got a good path to continue the conversation and make sure that we plan it and communicate it out. If it does end up closing, we'll need for lack of a better term, like a little PR campaign to let people know that that location is no longer available.
Anyone know if NC Care 360 also does referrals for homelessness?
I
That might be another source.
I thought NC Care 360 is what 211 used for
Is
some.
it?
I think so, but I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, I think we need to look at all those pieces of how do we filter everybody back through the correct channels so we don't have folks showing up and then tying up case managers at Families Moving Forward and Urban Ministries to use phones to call and be told, oh, sorry, yes, you're standing in a shelter, but there's no room for you at that shelter. Good luck.
I just thought though, when you said that if 211 uses NC Care 360, then to call all of your calls to 211 probably isn't going to help if NC Care 360 doesn't update its site.
Yeah,
I'm not sure who. Yeah.
And then the internet, you just Google homeless shelters and everything's going to pop up. So there's so many different ways, and that's why it's good to know kind of how are the people showing up. And it sounds like Tammy's team will at least do hey, how did you hear about showing up at our location? And that may help us target where we need to go at least as a starting point. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Otherwise, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
All right. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, Tammy seconding, and we will, all in favor can vote yay in the chat or exit the meeting, and that'll be a vote as well.
Y'all have a good day.
All right, have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your hard work.
Bye.
Bye.